Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello, listeners. This is your host, Andy Curry, and today I am really excited because I have with me professional speaker Chuck Inman, who has been speaking professionally for 10 years. And Chuck has written 2 books, which happens to also be the exact content he speaks on. So the first book and content he speaks on, the book is called Nimble, How to Lead Above the Turmoil of Change. And the second book he's wrote, which is also his other topic, is Chemical Brain Freeze, How to Stay in the Game During Difficulty and Stress. I couldn't read my own writing there for a minute. Sorry about that. And Chuck speaks in the U.S. He's based out of Texas. Chuck, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Andy. Good to be here.
I'm really happy you're here, Chuck. Let's talk about your speaking business. Before we get started on that, you had mentioned something about speaking to the FBI and U.S. Marshals and such, which sounded really interesting, so I want to be sure and cover that here in a little bit. But as far as your speaking business, tell us who you're helping, what goes on, what you're telling them.
Well, Andy, primarily I work with people who either want to start a business or they want to grow a business. It could be a division within a corporation, or it could be a young entrepreneur starting off, trying to get started, and it's helping them line out the things that they need to do to be successful. And sometimes some of the key things they need to do is overcome default behaviors that allow them to take that next step. You know, so many times I'll talk with people and they'll say, well, Chuck, what's the one thing I need to do? And as you well know, there's not one thing you need to do. There's a whole host of things that need to be done.
Right.
And it's getting over those default behaviors to make sure those things get done.
Default behaviors such as?
Well, the number one default behavior that we all have, and they've studied every society around the world, and every society has the fear of the unknown. And sometimes being able to walk through that fear and get it done regardless. You know, we're only born with 2 fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Every other fear we have is a learned fear. And our brain responds accordingly, whether it's a real fear or a learned fear, it tries to protect us from things. And so we don't always go after the targets we need to go after.
Are you teaching people to unlearn a fear?
We do that. In my training courses that I do, we take quite a bit of time walking through the unknown fears that people have and understanding the unmet emotional needs that may be the root cause of some of these fears that we have and how to overcome those.
You know, there's also the limiting beliefs, I think, which cause those fears. Are you helping people with that as well?
Oh, exactly. And one of the first things I do in my book, Nimble, when I talk about that is teach people, get up above, get that plateau view, that 30,000-foot view of what it is you want to accomplish and do. And when you go for that broad perspective, that helps you overcome those limiting beliefs that you have. And once you can figure out what it is that you want to do, not that what you need to do or have to do, but what is it that you want to do, then you can overcome those limiting beliefs and go make some things happen.
What have you found is the most common fear that people learn that you have to help them unlearn?
Well, I think the fear of failure. People truly have this fear of failure that can come from parents, relatives, family and friends. It's interesting, studies have been done. More people become successful once they move away from their hometown and all the peer pressure that they have. And it's usually after age 40, if they move away from their hometown, it's phenomenal how successful they become because people aren't telling them that they can't do it.
You know, Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich said typically it's people, I think he said was after age 40 or more around age 50 is when things really start to explode for them.
Well, and it's interesting in my book, Andy, I talk about Bill Gore, who I had a chance to work with when I was right out of college. And Bill invented Gore-Tex material, turned it into a $4 billion a year business. But when he was working at DuPont, they couldn't do anything with this material that nothing would stick to, nothing would bond to. It wouldn't conduct electricity. It wouldn't do anything. And he bought the patent rights from him at age 50. And he had to go take a second mortgage out on his house because none of the banks would loan him any money. But he knew if he could get that material to move, he would have the all-American material. And out of the basement of his house, he got that material to move and created Gore-Tex material. And the rest is history. He made, suits for the astronauts, uniforms for the military, and just medical products, implant devices, and so forth. So you're absolutely on target with that.
Now, what is the material? That's an interesting story.
Gore-Tex, expanded polytetrafluoroethylene.
So it's
outdoor wear for skiing and rainwear and so forth for outdoor recreation, and it coats wire and cable and computers and laptops and satellites.
Wow, what a great story. I mean, here's somebody 50 years old, has to take out a mortgage, doing something out of her basement. That is belief in yourself right there.
Exactly. And I had an opportunity to go out to lunch with him one-on-one, and at the time he was 73 years old. And we went out to his favorite Chinese food restaurant and sat across the table from him. I picked him up in my pickup truck that got me through college. And we were sitting there talking to him. He said, "Ask anything you want." And I said, "What kept you going when DuPont, the most greatest chemical company the world has ever known, couldn't do anything with it? And you're willing to stare him in the face and say, 'I'll take that and do something with it.'" And he just grinned. He goes, "You've got to believe. You have to believe in what you're doing."
Do you know how much he paid for that, to buy the rights to the invention of that?
I don't know that, Andy.
That would be curious to know.
I want to say it was something like $50,000, which was a phenomenal amount way back in the day, back in the 50s.
Well, sure. It is even today, but especially back then.
Right.
Wow, what a great story. Now, we had talked about the chemical brain freeze before you and I got in this interview. We discussed a little bit, and you said you're talking to FBI, I would imagine SWAT teams, U.S. Marshals and such. And that was really interesting to me how you're helping them. So talk about that. What are you saying to them? What are the interesting situations that you have to help them with, and that kind of information?
Well, let me back up just a second and help the listeners understand. Remember those hot summer days when you'd have a Slurpee or an Icy and you'd get a brain freeze where it just hurt, and for 20 seconds all you could think about was just that brain freeze and how it hurt? Well, that was caused by temperature. That's a Slurpee brain freeze. A chemical brain freeze is when something happens to you and your brain shuts down, and then you can't think of anything for 20 minutes. Have you ever had that experience where you're so mad you couldn't think straight? That's a chemical brain freeze.
Okay.
And when you deal with hostage negotiators, and I talked with the Texas Hostage Negotiating Association, FBI and police negotiators, the thing is not the good guy talking to the bad guy on the phone lines, because they're protected, but it's the rest of the hostage team who's talking to the mayor, they're talking to the city manager, because they've got roads blocked, they've got overtime, they've got all this stuff going on. That team is under pressure, and they have to stay in the game. You've heard that expression, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Right.
Well, sometimes that's when you have to be at your best. And so I teach people how to take a step back, regroup, and then walk back into that difficult situation more powerfully than before.
That's a killer technique, whatever, to know for anybody, because stress is relative to what you're doing, but we all have it. So what would be a technique or two that you would tell somebody to help them right here or in this interview to help them with that?
Well, it's just a couple of simple techniques. Is number one, if you feel your heart starting to beat faster, which will start to happen if you start to have a chemical brain freeze, your breathing getting faster, stop what you're doing. First and foremost, stop what you're doing. Say, "Hey, I need just a second." And then take a deep breath, because by taking a deep breath, you hack into that system that's causing that chemical brain freeze to happen. And when you have a chemical brain freeze happening, you've got a portion of your brain that's dumping adrenaline into your system. It's dumping cortisol, which is a hormone, shutting down your thinking brain. All this is happening within seconds. Your body temperature starts to heat up. Andy, you've probably heard that expression, if hot under the collar. Well, you're heating up real fast because your major muscles are getting ready to fight or flee. And so they're heating up and everything. So stop quickly, take a deep breath, grab a glass of water, or walk down the hallway and grab a cup of coffee, and deep breathe, kind of calm yourself down. And there's a couple other things I talk about in my book and in my training sessions that help you take it a couple of different levels. But those are two things you can do very, very quickly.
So you're interrupting the pattern of what's going on, basically.
Exactly, because your body, when you're when you feel threatened, there's a part of your brain called the amygdala, which is an interesting part of the brain, a little part of the brain. It's responsible for our emotional learning and emotional memory. And whenever it feels threatened, whether it's a real fear, like being attacked by a grizzly bear, or if it's a perceived threat, whether your boss is saying, why is this late? Your body starts to respond and it starts pumping chemicals into your bloodstream. And that's why if you start having a bad day and it keeps getting bad, it's because your body keeps putting these chemicals into your system, and yet you're not doing anything to take those out. And that's why a bad day keeps getting worse. And it's like, okay, what can you do to purge your system? And that's another one of the things that I talk about is how you can actually purge your system of those chemicals that you have and replace it with dopamine and serotonin, which is what runners get for runners, high and athletes get, and bikers and so forth.
Now, listeners may be thinking, how did you learn this information? How are you the expert? How did you come upon this and use it in your life and such? So where did that come from for you?
Well, I started off as a global director for marketing training. I taught product managers how to do all sorts of marketing stuff, but I also got to pull together a leadership training program. And because we had 31 product managers leave Asia, and they didn't go to work for leave the industry, they went to work for the competition. We're going, people aren't staying around. What is it? So we put together a leadership program with leadership and emotional intelligence. And studying Daniel Goleman and the work that he did on emotional intelligence, what makes a leader was one of his great Harvard Business Review articles that he had written. And Dr. Ledoux out of New York University, who was studying the brain and how it responded, we started finding out how the body performed under pressure and how some of the leaders who were in place weren't dealing with pressure real well, and people were leaving because of that. And so we wound up teaching in Asia the leadership courses and then brought it to the United States, Canada, South America, and Europe. So it was very, very successful.
That makes me think about what's going on, and I'm not when I'm going to bring this up, it's a political thing, but I'm not going to talk about politics, leaning one way or the other. But like this last debate that was going on with the GOP, and as they get asked questions and they fire stuff at one another, it seems to me some of those responses are based out of a physiological response from, oh my God, I got to cover my butt or something like that. Did you notice that at all? Or have you heard anything about that?
You bet. I mean, if you look back in 2012, Rick Perry couldn't remember one of the departments that he was going to eliminate. He had a chemical brain freeze. And if you looked at the GOP debates that were going on, sometimes when the candidates get asked a question, they take it personally, like it's a personal threat. And the amygdala responds quickly, and they come back with something personal about the interviewer or the person who's conducting the debate. And they attack them personally, and it's like, wait a second, how did that get that far out of hand that quickly? But the amygdala, that part of the brain, is feeling that as a threat, whether it's a real threat or a perceived threat, and it fights back quickly and comes out with some of these responses. Like you want to say 20 minutes later, going, why did I say that?
Yeah, well, I've had lots of those in my life.
I think we all have.
Well, how did you get started in the speaking business, Chuck?
Well, I think it was just watching people, especially during the leadership programs that I was doing, watching people who wanted to get ahead and they didn't know how. They didn't know what they needed to do to become an effective leader. So I started teaching personal leadership to people. And a lot of times people think, oh, leadership, you have to lead others. Well, that's one form of leadership, but the other form of leadership is personal leadership. Because we go out and we judge ourselves based on our intent. And most people have good intentions. Now, you may know some people who go out and just want to stink it up every day, but most people don't want to go do that. Now, sometimes they may step in it and stink it up, but that's a whole other story. But helping people understand that, we judge ourselves based on our intent. Other people judge us based on the impact that we have on them. And it's our actions that determine the impact that we have on them. So it's being consistent with what we say we're going to do and what we do that has a positive impact on people. And just showing, young people who want to get into leadership roles, helping them understand some of the basic fundamentals of leadership, helping them understand Napoleon Hill's works and Bill Gore's works and so forth. I had a blast talking. I would talk to people before meetings. We'd have breakfast meetings where people would get up an hour early to come listen to me, share ideas with them. And I love doing that. I just kept doing it. I said, someday when I retire, I'm going to go do this full time. And I've had a blast doing it.
Okay. Well, you've spoken to quite a few people in your career, and I know you've made lots of impact on various folks. What comes to mind when I ask you what immediately stands out in your head about an impact you made on someone, and what was it?
Oh, I think the one that I actually wrote about it, Chemical Brain Freeze, the last chapter of my book. It had to do with my youngest daughter, she was a beautiful girl, and went off to Austin to go to college, and came down with a disease that only attacks about 1/5 of 1% of teenage girls. It's a drug disease called acne fulminans, and just tore her face up just horrifically. And she moved back in with me, almost became a recluse, and had to deal with pulling her up where, some of the drugs she was on were very, they were just terrible drugs, depressive drugs, and had to watch her careful of suicide and so forth, and watch her eventually pull herself back and start coming back. And she's actually went back to school, back to college. She's a paralegal now, working and so forth. Didn't know if she'd ever get out of the house. And the first time she went to do something in public, she went to watch her sister graduate at a University of Texas, walked into a gymnasium with 50,000 people and watched her sister walk across the stage. And just watching her do a courageous act like that was just, for me, that was one of the deepest, most heart-rending things that I've ever been through.
Well, I can't imagine how you must have felt as a parent, because as parents, we love our kids so much. We want them to be happy, want them to succeed, and when we see things like that, it just makes our heart ache.
Exactly. And part of what I love to do is help people who are having problems, with their kids, with their children, teaching them how to talk more effectively, how to, communicate. And one of the keys, I think, on communication, and I always stress, I just got finished talking to a bunch of educational leaders in Fort Worth, Texas, and I shared with them the one reason we are not good communicators, one of our default behaviors, is that we don't listen to understand, we listen to reply. And if you can overcome that default behavior and listen to understand instead of waiting for your turn to jump in, your communication skills will pick up substantially.
The older I get, the more that I've thought a lot about that, and it's so true. And what's a good technique to help people to listen to understand?
If you concentrate on what people are saying, you don't have to worry about the next question. It will come naturally. But if you're waiting for them to stop where you can jump in and say something, you may not even be on target with your conversation. So listen to what someone's telling you and see what kind of question you can formulate from what they've just told you.
Good advice. Well, Chuck, thank you so much for spending your time with us. And I want to let people know how to get a hold of you should they want to get a copy of your book or hear you speak. So how do they do that? Chemical Brain Freeze is on Amazon.com, or you can go to chuckinman.com and you can order the book there. You can also, there's a contact tab on chuckinman.com if you're interested in having me speak or would like to talk to me. There's a place there that you can contact me. So. Okay, very good. Well, Chuck, thank you again so much for pulling back the curtain, giving us a peek into what you're doing. That information is very interesting, and I really enjoyed hearing about that.
Andy, thank you very much. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.